The ESP Query Composer is a powerful tool that allows users to define a cohort of patients of interest and request the data from network data partners. The Query Composer is flexible, enabling complex inclusion and exclusion criteria. The ESP Query Composer runs against a view of the larger ESP database. ESP stands for Electronic Support for Public Health and is a standardized representation of EHR data. ESP also uses complex algorithms that identify select reportable diseases of public health concern, such as diabetes, influenza-like illness, and Lyme disease. The PopMedNet software application currently supports 3 ESP request types: ICD-9 diagnosis, reportable disease, and the Query Composer. The Query Composer enables the most complex requests. For example, with an ICD-9 diagnosis or reportable disease request, I can query for patients who have received a diagnosis of influenza-like illness in the past month. But with a Query Composer request, I can query for diabetic patients who had received a diagnosis of ILI in the past month and no previous diagnosis of ILI within the past year, although they were active in the healthcare system within that period. Criteria groups are determined by the terms within each group. Currently, the available terms include ICD-9 diagnosis and disease terms, which are ORed within a criteria group, visit terms, which are ANDed, and demographic terms, which are ANDed, including age range, gender, race, and zip code. Next, I'll demonstrate how to compose a query using the Query Composer. Here I am logged into a Distributed Query Tool network portal using my investigator credentials. I'll go to the Request panel at the bottom of the home page and click New. Next, I'll select the request type from this box by going to ESP Request and selecting Query Composer. This is the Request Composer page. Here I can name my request and fill out any other details such as priority or due date. In the description, I'll add a brief description of my request and its purpose. Next, I'll select the Run mode. I can either submit my request immediately or schedule it to run later or to reoccur on a set schedule. Now I'll define my criteria groups. Remember that the primary criteria group is a group that determines the stratification of the results. In this case, the primary criteria group is cases of influenza-like illness within the past month. Now I'll define my criteria groups. Remember that the primary criteria group is the group that determines the stratification of the results. In this case, the primary group is cases of influenza-like illness within the past month, which is what I'll name it. Next, I need to add terms to this group. I'll hover over Add Terms and select Disease. From this drop-down, I can select influenza-like illness. I can also add diagnosis codes to this criteria group. I'll go to Add Terms, select Diagnosis, and click Add Codes. This brings up the code selector, where I can search by category of codes or use a search bar. I'll search for influenza, which brings up a list of results. I'll select 487 by clicking Add to add it to the query. Now this criteria group is looking through patients with a disease report for ILI or a code for influenza. I also only want to get results for adult patients, so I'm going to add a demographic term by hovering over Add Term, Demographics, and selecting Age Range. I can't leave the minimum or maximum age range undefined, so I'm going to type in 18 through a minimum and leave 120 as the maximum. Next, I'll define my observation period range. Today's date is already auto-filled, so I'm going to go to the start period and either type in the start date or select it from the calendar. Next, I'll click the checkboxes next to the start and end periods to make both dates apply to the criteria group. Finally, I'll select how I want my results to be stratified from the Report Selector box. I want my results to be stratified by 10-year age group, sex, and zip code. Now I've defined my first criteria group, but I want to know with new cases of ILI within patients with diabetes, so I need to add a second group. I'll go to the top of the Criteria Groups panel and click the plus button. I'll name my second group Diabetic Patients and add terms to the group. I want to find patients who have a disease report for type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes. Because I want to capture patients who have received a diagnosis of diabetes at any time, I'm going to leave the observation period open-ended for this criteria group. I can do this by just ensuring that the checkboxes next to the start and end periods aren't selected. So now my query is looking through cases of ILI within the past month, they're diabetic patients. But I also want to know that these cases are new, so I'm going to define a third criteria group that excludes previous cases of ILI in the previous year. So I'll add another criteria group, add my terms, define the observation period, making sure to check the checkboxes, and click Exclude Criteria Group. But I'm concerned that maybe these patients don't have a previously recorded case of ILI because they weren't active in the healthcare system during the previous year. So I'm going to add a final criteria group for patients who have had at least one visit within that healthcare system within the past year. I'll add the new criteria group, name it, add the visits term, define that term as a minimum of one visit, and define my observation period. So now I've finished composing my request. I have 4 criteria groups that are ANDed together to give me a final cohort of diabetic patients that have had a case of ILI within the past month, but no previous case of ILI in the previous year, despite being active in the healthcare system within that period. I'll finish my request by selecting which data marts to submit the request to and clicking Submit. Thank you for watching this demonstration video. For more information, please visit popmednet.org or contact popmednet@hphc.org.